All right, welcome to the No Show. My name is Andrea Edwards.
I'm Tim Wade.
And my name is Joe Augustin. I'm struggling very hard not to look tired because my mom saw last week's show and she said that I looked a bit under the weather. So welcome to the show that tries to celebrate knowledge, tries to celebrate being informed as we try to make being in the know a cool thing. And we also have a special guest who's joining us, and she's the kind of person in a sense, if you haven't arranged for her to be around, then you see her, she's bad news. But if she's the person you've called in, she's there to help the news not be so bad. She is someone who specializes in crisis communications. She's Samantha Gayfer, and she's also the founder of a company. I love the name of, by the way, Duck. What was it? It's what's it called again? Duck Communication.
Duck Feet Communications.
Duck Feet Communications. I love the sentiment about that. But yeah, so would you take a moment there, Samantha, and clue us in about what you're about?
Yeah, I've spent my whole career in marketing communication spaces, 14 years of which was in the Middle East, working with the largest foreign investor on the Palm, which had its fair share of crisis. If anyone knows a bit about that project.
The Palm, yes.
The Palm, yes.
Yeah. No, but you did such a great job. We don't remember any of it.
Exactly. Well, you didn't hear about any of it because I did such a great job.
Yeah.
If you heard about it, it wasn't a project I was working on. And then we left the UAE and spent 2 years back at home in Canada. And I ended up working in education, which felt most definitely like the most rewarding part of my career. Certainly not financially, but definitely on a personal level. And I stayed in education when we went to Phuket, where I met Andrea. We worked for 4 years with UWC Thailand, which also had its fair share of ups and downs. And so I decided to spin that into a full-time consultancy with the Jane Group, where I work with schools and educational institutions to manage crisis. But as Andrea also knows, I love philanthropy. It's a huge part of who I am as a person. And I was doing so much of it that I needed something to kind of hold that space. And so I created Duck Feet Communications for the purpose of doing that philanthropic work and a couple of little branding pieces here and there on the side.
Yeah. I want to add, Sam is one of the most talented people I've ever worked with. And I don't say that
Hang on a minute. I thought that was us.
No, it's not you. If you've seen the little videos I've been doing, they're all Sam. I wrote the words and she sort of brings them to life. She's really taught me so much about the power of visual communication because I'm a word person, and so is Sam. But she's also a visual communicator, and she's incredibly talented. And the whole One Phuket thing, a huge part of the success was the passion that Sam put into it on the communication side and bringing everyone on board. So she's a lady worth knowing, definitely.
I'm just going to say, I think the reason for its success, we probably have, on the left side of the screen right now, both of you are the reason why that kind of thing happened because of the energy you put into it as well. Would like to welcome you if you're joining the No Show for the first time. The format of the show is we start off by getting filled in with some of the stories in the news, and then we add some comments to that. And then we look very much forward to what Sam will add on at the later part of the show as well, where she talks about her area of specialty and what she'd like particularly to share with us. So having said that, and I beg your pardon for rushing things along as well, because I'm prematurely going to say I'm sorry for leaving early because I do have to today. So I'll just put that on the table. Let's get to what's been happening in the news, Andrea.
Well, I don't know if you're, but who's a Wordle person here?
Well, obviously you, because you said you were a word person and Sam does all the video.
Yeah, but I'm not a Wordle person. Anyone?
Sam, are you on Wordle?
No.
Okay.
No.
I'll summarize it for everybody. So you guys remember the game Mastermind?
Yes.
Okay, so Mastermind was 4 colors. You try to figure out whether you had the right colors in the right place or wrong place, whatever it is with those symbols, right? So imagine a game that is like Mastermind, but played with 5-letter words instead. So you try your 5-letter word, and then the computer tells you whether or not you've got the right word, the right letters, perhaps in the wrong place or completely wrong, whatever it is. And using that information, over 6 guesses, you're trying to guess that word. And the social sharing part of this program has been pretty clever. It's been basically helping people share not the spoilers, not the actual final answers, but you can see people's efforts to get there in 2 turns, 3 turns, 5 turns, whatever it is. And I think the curiosity got to me, and I kind of bought into it and tried it out, and now I'm stuck with it as well.
Yeah.
So that's why you're leaving early today.
Yeah, that's right. Absolutely. It's a big
Wordle's out.
Wordle. It's a Wordle hustle.
Yeah. So it's a classic. Just this last week, it's a classic emergence of something new and how people sort of jump onto it. So I always find those little things fascinating, and you often watch them fizzle out fairly quickly. But this one, everyone's speaking a different language. There's so little information for you if you're not participating that makes it intriguing, that makes you want to participate, right? But the good news is there's no information being sold onto apps if you participate in Wordle. So it's a bit of an intellectual game. I'm expecting more and more of my community to pick up on it, but it's a really fascinating example of something new coming into our lives.
Also, by the way, free hint, because you're watching this this live stream and listening to the podcast, one of the best words to try as a first word is penis.
Oh. Excellent. That's good. Thanks.
All righty then. Let's get on to the news.
Yeah.
Joe, you can go now, actually, if you really want.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is your mum watching today? She'll be proud.
I hope not. Today's not the day, Mom.
Well, I'm not getting tired now, buddy.
Yeah, I was going to mention your tiredness, I think, comes from your extended nocturnal activities, but we don't want to put that and penis next to each other, right?
No. Trading.
Yeah. Okay, so the big piece of news that I think captured my attention and my heart was in Tonga, and what's happened there. And we still don't really know what's happened there. We know that there's great devastation. The blast was 10 megatons, which is more powerful than a nuclear bomb. So basically, it's the equivalent to 10 megatons of TNT, and it's 500 times as powerful as the nuclear bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima in Japan in World War II. They believe it's the loudest eruption since Krakatoa, however you say
Krakatoa.
Krakatoa.
Yeah.
Is it? Doesn't look like it. In Indonesia, in 1883, and because that was above land, it spread its ash and made the region dark. So because this was under the ocean, it looks like we might have gotten to the end of the most extreme from how it impacts the rest of us. But it's been a heartening sort of week where we're seeing the world come together to come and deliver aid. Food and water is obviously limited, but COVID's going to be a big issue because it's. Oh, there you go. There's there's some amazing imagery that's coming out.
So the picture on the left, if you're watching this on social media, the picture on the left is the island before it blew up, and the picture on the right is the same island with the island missing.
Yeah.
And if you are listening to this on a podcast, you can always jump in to Andrea's We Can Read, find the link, and go and have a look at the pictures. But I just find that picture amazing.
Yeah. But as my geotechnical engineering husband said, Tonga is created from volcanic eruptions. So all of the landmass in the Pacific is actually created from volcanic eruptions. So, yeah, it's sort of fascinating to see it happening in real time. But the other issue, of course, for Tonga is they've only had 1 case of COVID in October last year. And it's obviously a region where if COVID gets in, it could actually create great suffering. So it looks like aid personnel will not be able to put their boots on the ground. They'll just be able to fly aid in. But it's been I'm just really feeling for not just the people there who are being impacted, but also their families living outside of Tonga who can't get any information. The big cable's still cut. It's weeks, maybe months before that's fixed. So That's been a big story for me this week. Did you guys keep track of that one?
Yeah,
Well,
I keep waiting. Sorry. I keep waiting to hear about what the predictions are in terms of the impact on the aquatic life. Because there's no way that you don't have that explosion underwater without it having a massive impact on local ecosystems. And I haven't seen
their fishing
yet.
Their fishing's going to be in trouble too.
Right.
Actually, if you looked at that picture again, you will see that the island on the left, it's dark blue in the top left corner and it's lighter underneath. But the picture on the right, everything is light. And partly it's because, well, let me do it that way. The island's sitting here and that the other plate's gone down. And they're saying that there's catacombs of lava, etc., under here that seawater may have got into, hence the big explosion. And so there's in the article there's a sort of a GIF of the explosion as well, or a bunch of photos put together to see the size of the explosion. But when you look at the one on the right, unless it's debris in the water that it hasn't settled, it's actually there's a lot more shallow has now turned up, so to speak. It's amazing. And if marine life is severely impacted, which I imagine it has to be, their fishing stocks are going to be one of their primary sources of protein will be severely impacted. But that's on that island. That's not the main island, but that's on that one.
Yeah, and maybe if we hadn't screwed around with the fish before, but it's a natural event that it's normal to get over. So but Steve's just jumped on saying, "Good to see you here, Sam."
Hi, Steve.
And Steve, if you want to add anything on the plates or anything, feel free. All right, some other news. Djokovic, it's finally over. He was booted out of Australia, and the French Open is now threatening that it will also not accept unvaccinated players. So hopefully that will take the attention off the Australian government. The 5G and the airline industry, or the telcos and the airline industry in the US, have had a bit of a week. Apparently, they launched 5G like they were going to do, and they've already delayed it by weeks. It was going to create an infrastructure meltdown. I found this incredibly fascinating because if you actually look around this, there were some stories of some other countries that couldn't fly their planes in, but the vast majority of countries are ready for 5G. It looks like the majority of these American airlines haven't upgraded the equipment on board to cope with the new 5G. And I think it's still being delayed. The telcos have had to step back again because they're not ready to do it. So
I didn't get that from the article. So I did get that the older altimeter equipment and some of the automations that are linked to it with regards to reverse thrust as the plane has landed can get impacted by the 5G signal because the frequency they've chosen is very similar to the frequency of the airline altimeters and other bits and pieces. And so as a result, if it lands and there's some sort of interference, it means that the airplane doesn't know that it's at that level, which means it doesn't activate the reverse thrusters, which means the airplane ends up going off the end of the runway. That was what I read into it. What I didn't get was that the Americans hadn't updated their planes, but everybody else had.
Yeah, I probably didn't share that one with you. There's so many articles on it. But yeah, it's a bit of a mess.
The old wide body Boeings are the big one, and it's a really common carrier in North America, not just the States, Canada too.
Yeah,
but the wide body plane is elsewhere. Have they upgraded it? They've upgraded it, so it's okay.
Well, a lot of the planes that exist outside of the US are because the aerospace industry has exploded in the last 20 years, so they will have newer bodied aircraft with different equipment, right? Whereas a lot of the older aircrafts, if they haven't been maintained, and then in the last couple of years with COVID, the airline industry hasn't exactly been flush. So they've probably delayed any expenditure, right? So I'm sure that plays a part of it as well.
I've gotten on planes in Canada that still have an ashtray in the armrest between two seats. So that's not a new plane.
Yeah.
Hashtag take the train.
Yeah. Yeah. Another story that broke this week is this guy called, I'm going to try and say his name. He's a billionaire investor called Chamath Palihapitiya. Sorry to anyone who knows how to say that correctly. At least I tried. Anyway, basically he said he and most Americans don't care about abuses against the Uyghur minority in China. And he has had massive backlash, as he should. However, I agree that I don't think that most Americans care about abuses against the Uyghur community in China. But I think here the problem is that he said he didn't care and then brought everybody else into it. So that's a bit of cancel culture going on there. I think potentially well-deserved, but it just sounds like he's just completely out of touch with, the world. The number one hashtag last year? Love. I was just doing some research on it yesterday. A couple of years ago when I did research, it was photo of the day. Last year it was love. So I would suggest that Chamath is out of touch with how people are feeling in the world today. And another story that broke... Sorry?
Yeah,
Go.
I mean, I think globally, yes. I wouldn't be so sure that he is out of touch with American sentiment, though. I mean, if we look really at specifically the U.S., I would say that's not on most people's radar in the U.S.
Yep.
Yeah, but being on their radar and not caring, I think, are two different things, right?
Totally. And I think that he has misspoken about what he intended to say. But yeah, I think it's a tricky place to sort of admit in a time where nationalism is on the rise that the blinders are perhaps on to what is going on elsewhere.
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
Yeah, I think had he said something like, I think most Americans aren't aware of what's going on and it's not impacting their lives in a direct way, and we're being distracted by so many other things that our ability to express care and concern is being thwarted by these other distractions, like, I don't know, Wordle.
Yeah.
Then people might have gone, yeah, this is an important thing. We should be knowing about it.
Yeah.
Instead of, everyone coming down on him. But I would tend to agree that what he meant to say and what he actually said,
Missed the mark.
Yeah. Mind
part
your
of me-
words.
Part of me is also responding to, you remember we talking about this preloaded indignation, right? I mean, you can pretty much get the same sort of reaction by saying something bad about Taylor Swift, right? I mean, I mean that really is the problem is about. I mean, like you said, he said something that may have been factually correct, but by dubbing everybody else, and they go like, no, we're not assholes. We don't want to own that as well. You go ahead. You be the big asshole. We're not.
Actually, it would be Google first.
Yeah, exactly. Where's you?
And then no.
Yeah. So I do pity the people who speak truth without perhaps a full charge of EQ to go along with it. I think EQ is that missing link sometimes for people. I mean, like, we're lucky, like Elon Musk gets away with a lot of stuff because he happens to be in a technological space and he's allowed to be a little bit weirder. But as long as you're mainstream
and he's on
and
the
you say
spectrum, right?
Yeah,
which
helps.
sort of covers many sins.
Yeah,
but I mean, it can also be cultural upbringing. I mean, we're all living and working in Asia, and a lot of different cultures. When you talk about issues that, say, from an Australian, Canadian, American perspective, we use more delicate sort of language when we talk about stuff. Whereas when you come into regions in countries in Asia, there's a harsher sort of way of talking about things, and so there's so many different dimensions. But the most important thing is mind your words, right? If you're going to make a comment, just pay attention to the words that you're using.
A lot of my American friends, though, not a lot, a few of the American friends I've had who are very much about just self-expression, they do hold on pretty tightly to the idea that it's just words. And I feel that words make a big difference. But when they were discussing issues like Amos Yee, for instance, what a great decision that turned out to be for the Americans to let him in. But he was guilty at the time of just saying the wrong words. And I had American friends who were defending and saying, well, it's just words. You can't cause any real damage by that. And the thing about that is, it goes down to what they believe to be true. So if they believe that to be a real value, they'll defend it as well. So they'll try to blunt the idea that words can affect other people, because they'll say, well, that is your choice to be affected,
Yeah. Although in Amos's case, I think he was also guilty of being a complete and utter turd.
Yeah. He was overqualified, but
going back to Chamath, though. Chamath, you need to speak to Samantha Gayfer.
Yes.
Her details are on the bottom of the screen. Duck feed communication. In fact, you needed to have spoken to her before you said it. That would have been better.
Yeah.
But if you get a second chance,
to work on that apology that didn't sound like an apology.
Yeah, exactly.
What would you do?
The space that he exists in, like.
Yeah.
He's speaking to this microcosm of people who absolutely care about those things, but kind of referencing the greater United States. It was just a disaster.
What would be like your 3-step plan, Samantha, to sort of dig him out of the hole, that apart from remove the shovel from his hand?
Yeah.
What else would you do?
It depends on the person, because the thing is that there's a 3-step plan, but if he isn't actually sorry, the plan doesn't matter, and I won't work with him. Right? Okay. So, and I don't know if he's actually sorry, because I can't tell from what he has done in response to that situation. But if he was genuinely sorry, then the first thing you do is take accountability for what you've said. Then you say what you intended to say, and then you explain how you're going to make sure that you don't say anything stupid like that again. Yeah. So, I mean, it's not rocket science, and companies that do it well, usually end up in a stronger position than they were in before a crisis. But if they handle it poorly, then it's a spiral.
Yeah, and I think he should put some of his billions into the World Food Program as well. That might help as well. But I mean, I would definitely recommend that he needs to fall on his sword in public and
100%
put himself out there. Him, not crafted, no PR spin, none of that. Him, and that's.
But he has to be genuinely sorry, otherwise it's just bad optics. Yeah.
So my thought about this is, if he is not genuinely sorry, is then the next better advice just to shut up and shut up some more?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good. I just want to check what I'm going to do when it's time.
Well, he could just take his billions and ball and go home.
Yeah.
Sorry.
There's ways out of this. There is a future for him, but he's got to tread carefully, because a lot of people will just put him at arm's length. They won't want anything to do with him, or it could fizzle out and be nothing in a short period of time. But
he could use this as an opportunity to really turn things around, and he could invest a ton of money in helping people understand what is going on in other parts of the world, and he could make an actual difference based on this mistake. Yeah. And he's got the time and the money to do it. So there's no reason they shouldn't have someone counseling him right now to do exactly that.
Yeah. All right. Another story that broke this week, which I thought was a bit sad, was a story about this lady called Michelle Go, who basically was pushed to her death on a New York City subway station. Now, I was relieved that it wasn't a hate crime. It sounded like it was just a homeless person that just walked up behind and pushed her. So the real story will come out, but it's triggered a lot of feelings of fear within the American Asian community, because they're obviously experiencing a lot of hatred and abuse, physical violence. We've seen, old ladies pushed down and kicked. But one of the things, have you guys noticed how many of the hate crimes, whether it's towards a race, so the Chinese race, whatever that interpretation is in American society, or culture, so often Muslim women, if there's a terrorist attack, it's often the women who are the victims of the physical violence. And, you kind of just sort of think that it's big, brave men attacking these weaker women to get their point across. But I am relieved that it's not a hate crime, but very, very, very sad and horrible story. Did you guys hear that one come through?
Yeah.
I've got to be honest. For me, this looking at the headline now is the first time I'm actually hearing about the story, and it's it's a reflection, one, of how busy I've become this past week, but it is also, I think, a reflection of how much space there is to pick up stuff. There's so many things that have happened this week, and I haven't been organically informed about it. So it's one of those things. We actually do have to go out and go in search of things to find stories like these sometimes.
That's the beauty of the Weekend Reads by Andrea T Edwards. And there was two things that I felt when I read that particular piece. One was the guy had to go a few times to push someone. Most of them got out of the way, and she just didn't see him or whatever and was pushed. And either he's got a screw loose with regards to needing to do that or whatever, but he immediately then said it was me and was taken into some form of custody, which to me, I don't know why I thought this, but it felt like he wanted to be taken into custody and get a meal and a shelter and something like that. I don't know why he had to kill someone to do that, but he could have just gone and peed on a police car. That would have done the trick. But
you don't get a long-term commitment that way.
Yeah, I guess so. But
that was a repeat offender.
Yeah. Okay.
And it's really common. It's happened on my husband's side of the family where somebody committed a crime and then couldn't handle the outside, and so did it again to go back in. And if this person's living on the streets, it's the dead of winter in New York City, he's got a much more comfortable existence behind bars than he does on the street. And the reality is that if you look at the social services systems that are in place, and North America has some wonderful things in place, but also some immense challenges with how equitably they're distributed or how safe they actually are. And for a lot of these people who are living on the street, a shelter is less safe for them than the street is. And so the safest place for them to be is behind bars.
Yep.
Yeah. Institutionalization, right? Yeah.
The second thing that really resonated was pretty much echoing what you said, Andrea, but it was like this incident was an opportunity for voices of women, in particular Asian women, to be heard again, that they just don't feel safe. Yeah. That they're checking over their shoulder all the time to see if somebody's following them. And I hear that. I typically hear that. I hear that in different parts of the world, but I hear it a lot from over there, and a bit in, not so much in Australia, but mainly over in the US.
Oh, you definitely hear it in Australia. Yeah. Not the targeted hate, but a woman dies every week to her domestic partner. I mean, violence towards women has been on the rise since the pandemic began. It's never been a problem that we've, taken seriously. I mean, all over the world. I mean, it's just violence towards women is a sign of societal breakdown. To me, that if the men are so angry and unhinged that they're going to take it out on the women, then we've got bigger problems that we need to solve. I mean, the case that we're talking about, there's a person who needs help, and a life was lost because the system isn't set up to help people like that. And we just don't seem to ever want to fix those problems within our societies, and people have to bear the cost of that. So grieving families of Michelle Ho, it's like, let's sort it out. Let's do a better job.
I have never in my life gone for a run anywhere other than, interestingly, in the Middle East, and not been constantly concerned for and or aware of my personal safety.
Yeah. And
I'm 44 years old, and I have grown up in by no means affluent areas, but certainly not impoverished areas. I grew up in the era of Paul Bernardo, who hopefully is someone you don't have any idea who he is, but he was a serial killer. And, I grew up as the 14-year-old blonde person he was trying to abduct off the streets. And that has stayed with me my entire life, no matter where I am.
Wow.
And my husband, now he's 6'6" and he can take care of himself, but he's never, ever had to think about that when he goes on a run. Yeah. It's just ever present for women, and more so right now for Asian women. And I read a piece that was sort of saying, you know, the fact that they're slight in stature and they tend not to be, you know, strong and what have you, makes them an even easier target than I am, who is probably walking around with my key through my knuckles just in case I need it for some reason.
It's amazing.
I want us to do better for my girls.
Yeah. I mean, okay. So this is me saying the popular thing as always, right? What I hear actually is about the vulnerable, feeling vulnerable, and it really is about, you know, it is the nature of the world, right? I mean, what I was thinking about is, you know, in terms of how I summarize the whole thing is small people are at greater risk of being attacked as compared to big people. That is one way of doing it, because you just talk about the natural stature and all that kind of stuff, right? It's and what happens is, I think it gets broken down into a racial thing, and that becomes a bit unfortunate, because really what it is it's predators and prey. That's really what it is. And you're like, if you're a small animal, you're higher on the scale than if you're a big animal. That's really what it is. And it happens to be that certain racial profiles also fit that kind of whole thing, right? So we buy into the whole we buy into the whole thing. What I think we can do in response to it is learn from the Chihuahuas, because if you look at how dogs work, and this is again why I'm popular, right? Chihuahuas really put up this really aggro sort of like, you know, don't mess with me. It's not worth it at all. I have really small, sharp teeth. So when it comes to messing around with dogs, big dogs really don't want to spend much time on a Chihuahua, even though they're the small one, because they have that much bite in them. So maybe part of this, again, I was thinking about why, for instance, Asian men, even though they're more diminutive in nature, don't get as much trouble, is because the branding is really good, right? I mean, you know, a Chinese a person walking down the park also knows Kung Fu for some reason, right? So I really think there's something else that can be done about the way we approach these things as well, because part of it is adopting the fear. Because when I went to Australia, a lot of my friends said, you know, you got to look out for all these things. You know, look out for racism. You got to look out for all, you know, you got to look out for. There are lots of reasons to be afraid. And there's something about the way I work is that I don't get those memos, and I don't sort of buy into that, so I don't carry myself like I worry about it that much. And in the time that I had in Australia, I didn't have a single thing to reinforce the idea that there was racism in Australia. Now, I know for people in Australia, this might sound like a surprise as well, but that was my reality, because I carried myself and my attitude into it as well. So I don't want to talk about it in terms of making it sound like this is about victim blaming or whatever it is, but there is a lot to be said about what you carry into it as well, you know? Just the way you walk helps someone who is a predator decide, no, I'm not going to mess with this one.
Yeah.
I mean, that's something to think about.
And that's a common thing. So first of all, you're the only person that could say some of those things out of the four of us. So that's good. So you shouldn't be cancelled. But the other thing that women learn or girls learn is how you carry yourself matters. So if you're walking in a situation, you always look up, you look ahead, put your shoulders back. All of my friends who were molested or raped on the streets when I was younger, they were the sort of people that would sort of be hunched down. So that's a common sort of idea that we're taught. So women talk about this stuff all the time, like how you carry yourself, how you look, how you dress. You know, because and regardless, no matter how you dress, unless you've got a sack over your entire body, it doesn't matter, because you'll still be blamed for whatever happened to you because you were dressed a certain way, right? But yeah, it's a common conversation that women have from the youngest age. The youngest age. I mean, Sam, your girls are probably talking about it already, you know, based on how they interact with the world and what they see, right?
My girls are in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.
Yeah, that's the other thing. Teach your girls how to fight.
They can
Yep.
put you in a rear naked choke if you touch them and they don't like it. But
and
I mean,
strip all your hair off at the same time.
Yeah, man. But yeah, wouldn't it be nice if it didn't have to be part of our psyche?
Yeah.
Yep, it would be.
Yeah.
Right.
Moo Zebron in the comments says it's also interesting to see how the media reports domestic violence or the violence in this particular way, and cites an example of a headline that just says "Woman dies after being pushed onto subway tracks in Times Square." No mention
Instead of man pushes woman on subway. Yes, Moo. Yes.
Yep.
Yes. And all of the reporting on violence against women, woman raped, woman molested, woman
angry woman killed by her husband, hysterical woman killed by her husband because the neighbors report that she used to, it's like, well, so it's her fault, all the time.
Well,
all
okay.
the time.
Another unhinged man assault a woman, right?
Don't say it, Joe.
Yeah.
I know it's never worthwhile. But when I was growing up in Melbourne, one of the interesting statistics, and again I didn't fact check this, so I'm responsible for what I'm saying right now. But one of the statistics was in Melbourne, particularly, we had one of the highest incidents of spousal abuse by women. So this is an interesting thing, and I don't want to mention the cultural angle on that, but there is they attribute it to a certain kind of culture where the women were a little bit more aggressive, but that happened in Melbourne.
It's absolutely happening. It's absolutely happening. Domestic violence goes both ways.
Yeah.
But until we hear that one husband a week is being killed by his wife, I don't think it's the bigger problem that we're facing with. But yes, it is definitely a two-way street. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Shall we move on to COVID?
They said happily.
All right. So I'll go through a couple of key pieces that I pulled out this week, which will be in my weekend reads tomorrow. And the first is a piece in Reuters, which is an analysis titled "How Omicron Highlights Fading Hope of Herd Immunity from COVID." So basically, this is sort of they weren't expecting to be here with Omicron as they are. A lot of people are getting COVID even though they've been vaccinated and boosted. It doesn't protect you, although we did hear today that Sputnik 5, the Russian vaccine, apparently is good against Omicron. And then the French have released another vaccine that's been approved, which is also good against Omicron. So there's a couple of chances. But the reality
research too that said Sinovac had a decent go at Omicron as well.
Oh yeah, I haven't seen anything on that. So maybe I'll be all right.
It was months ago. And I don't know, like Joe, I need to go back and fact check that, but
I haven't seen anything about Sinovac for quite some time because it sort of turned out to be, it basically disappears from your system. One of the hotel GMs here had 2 shots of Sinovac, 3 months later got COVID, did a blood test, 0 sign of any vaccine. So it's kind of been taken out of the mix here.
That might have been no Sinovac.
Yeah. Can
I just take one moment to talk a little bit about how vaccines work? When you look into someone's system a few months after they've had a vaccine, even if it's a Pfizer, you're not necessarily supposed to actually see any antibodies. What it's supposed to be is the memory of the infection is supposed to be in the body so that it can react and produce it. So that's why if you do get an infection now of any kind, Omicron or Delta, whatever it is, the rate at which the viral load will increase and then your antibodies kick in comes in this way. That first of all, the viral load will come up, and it'll take a while before your antibodies come up as well, because what happens is it gets the message, and then the manufacturing and the memory comes up, and then you get all that stuff in your system. So it's not entirely accurate to go and look and say, do I have any antibodies in my system right now? Because what it is it's about the data. It's whether the data is in a usable place and it's easily retrievable, and the body can react. Anyway, sorry. Quick.
No. You're absolutely correct. But I'm just saying, as a person who got double dosed up with Sinovac, and then found out fairly quickly that was pretty useless.
It's definitely not the strongest, but I'm sure that there was something that said actually with Omicron it provided some protection.
Okay.
Yeah, I heard that at the start as well, because of its more natural. It was a more natural vaccine. The hope was that it had therefore a more natural kind of behavior as well, because it was not just about the spikes, it was about the whole virus. So that's why the Omicron, that's what the theory was about, why it would be better against Omicron. Sadly, we don't have much new data that says that it's great, though. It's not shown to be very effective.
No.
But right from the start, we've always said we need to get vaccines in every arm that can take a vaccine. And for anyone who thinks we think that people who can't take a vaccine should take a vaccine, we've never said that. It's about if you can take a vaccine and having access to vaccines. But poorer nations have been forced to dump close to expiry COVID vaccines. So basically COVAX, which is the organization that's sending vaccines around the world, they're so close to their expiry date that they're actually having to dump them. So we still have a very small percentage of a large population of the world unvaccinated. And it's going to keep going around and around and around until we sort that out. One of the most interesting articles that I is in my weekend reads is called How the mRNA Vaccines Were Made, Halting Progress and Happy Accidents. And that appeared in the New York Times. So a lot of people won't take the vaccines because they think it's new. This is a story 20, 30, 40 years old. And it was basically a technology that was ready at the right time. And that's why we have the mRNA vaccine. So if you have been hesitant because you think it hasn't been around long enough, I really recommend reading this. Tim, I know you had a look at that article too.
Yeah, I loved it. This is a long toilet read, and but it's a really nice article because it kind of it takes you through some of the key players and those passionate researchers who wanted to solve the problem of the day. One of them being AIDS. Clinton was in power. AIDS was the challenge. There's a picture there of Fauci presenting to Clinton and Gore, and the researchers are in there trying to use. One of them in particular, she discovered how mRNA would be the solution. That she was thinking, no, this can change the world, and yet everyone was like, no, let's go to gene therapy. And so it was. And then she was underfunded. I think she was over in Hungary. She was underfunded, so she went over to the US to try and get funding. So there's this whole world of passionate, intelligent people trying to solve the problems, but a lot of it's coming down to funding and where the money goes, and what the big headline is really. But anyway, so what I love about it is it just shows the whole connecting the dots idea of how little pockets over here made one piece of the jigsaw puzzle, another little pocket made another piece, and then people just left it because they were going, well, I've spent my life on this and I'm not helping anyone, so they leave and go buy a camper van and travel around America. And yet today, like it was like a decade later or so, all those pieces that they left there, these markers that they left there, were able to be put together to help create this. I mean, obviously it was a journey along the way as they're trying to solve problems, but HIV was one of those super resistant ones that had multiple ways into the cell, and so they were saying, let's try and maybe we should focus on something else that has got lesser pathway, lesser ways of getting around how we're trying to stop it, and that will help us build something to stop the more potent ones. So
there's another story, and I can't remember it exactly, but mRNA technology has now been used to create a vaccine for mono. You guys all know mono, right? You know, that's something that they think 80, 90, 95%, no, not monobrows, 95% of people have got. And they think it could also be why things like Alzheimer's have increased. So I've always understood the mono, it impacts your thyroid, and it's all these complications. So I was really excited to read about that as well. So the technology, and obviously it's got, you know, it's used in cancer. There's so many areas of it, but it's I think that will be a really fascinating area to follow.
You know what has been a blessing for those people that are passionate about these things is that COVID has given them massive funding to accelerate the research really, really quickly to make this possible to be put into these other things. And so, you know, time, you know, I mean, obviously a lot of people have suffered and have hurt and everything, but the history books will say that was a key moment in you know,
medical
in health
science, right? Yeah,
in medical science. A big key moment.
And in philanthropy.
Yeah.
Because
Right.
The only one thing that could have been better in all of this is that it was 10 years earlier, before social media really took off. I mean, really, that would really ultimately be how all the ducks would have lined up, because that is what's stopping it from being the great thing it can be right now, is the crazy wall of skepticism that's coming back. And
I disagree, because I get what you're saying. If it wasn't for social media, then everyone would have gone, take the vaccine. Everyone gone, yep, fair enough, and they got the vaccine. But because of social media, it's delayed it even longer, which means more money is being pumped into the thing. So that would be where I would disagree. I know I kind of agree with you, but I kind of disagree with you.
But historically,
the technology.
Sorry, Samantha.
There are more people who have responded to social media and gotten the vaccine than there are who have responded to social media and not gotten the vaccine.
Yeah.
So, and who knows, with hindsight that none of us have, what those ratios would have looked like in the absence of that online dialogue. But, you know, we've seen the way Me Too has happened and Black Lives Matter has happened, and all of those would not have gotten any of the traction they did without social media. And I think the vaccine's the same. And I agree, there is definitely the flip side of that, which is it has given those people a voice who are doing everything they can to tear down the progress of eradicating the pandemic. But I think it did more good than harm.
Yeah, I agree with you, Sam. And, you know, 95% of people living in nations around the world who have full access to vaccines are getting vaccinated. And history shows that it's exactly the same. It's exactly the same, whether before social media it is with social media. So while people do blame social media for a lot of the ills in our world, it's actually it's no different to normal. But Joe, you need to go, right?
Yeah, I'm gonna be a real bad sport and say, you guys disagree with me, I'm leaving. But have a great rest of the show. I really wish I could stick around and stick my hand into the electric socket more often. But I gotta go and do this other thing.
All right, take care. Have a good weekend, Tom.
Okay, you too. Bye-bye.
We want to know what the other thing is, but later.
Sure.
See you, Joe.
All right. Because Omicron is obviously mild. It's making a lot of people want to go out there and catch it, because they figure, if I'm going to catch one, I'm going to catch this one. Anyway, so there's a lot more sort of articles coming out, and in Axios they've published an article called "What Mild Really Means When It Comes to Omicron." So if you think it's a good idea to catch it, I would suggest reading this article before you do. Another thing is the data, like how do you record deaths in the Omicron era? So in the BBC, what's really going on with COVID deaths data? So basically, yes, there are many, many more people being infected, and that means more people are going to catch it and get sick. But what it also means is that more people will die with COVID, not from COVID. So traditionally, the way they measured it is people dying 28 days after positive infections. And with Omicron, that's all changed. So check out this piece because it's a really interesting one because it sort of really talks to the data challenge of this time as well. That's all changed. So check out this piece because is that you, Tim?
Yeah, that was me. I was trying to reply to Denise Van Rooyen, who had said
Denise,
is it? Posted something about cannabinoids, which I just found
right.
Really interesting. How cannabinoids are blocking the virus actually getting through. So sorry for the interruption.
Hey Denise, so that was one of the pieces we talked about last week. So basically, it's a looks like a potential good one, as far as protecting you from getting COVID. It's like I said, Singapore,
marijuana people.
Yeah, Singapore, you're not going to be set up for that. But in Thailand, which has a growing industry, at least we'll have access to the latest technology. All right, another story that came through. So I think
it just slows down the virus and makes it hungry.
Nice. Last week, I think it was, I shared an article about this. I think it was like a 48-year-old politician in the US who argued against vaccines and then died of COVID. And she is getting an enormous amount of online hate. Now, for me personally, I don't. My sons keep saying to me, "Who do you hate, Mum?" And I don't hate anyone. They're like, "But you hate Donald Trump." I'm like, "No, I don't hate Donald Trump. I don't hate anyone. There are people I don't respect. There are people I feel sorry for, but I don't hate anyone." So for me, the idea of going onto someone's social media profile and attacking them and just saying disgusting things after they've died, it actually breaks my heart that that's where we are. On the other side, I do understand how people are so frustrated because these people have not only made the pandemic harder for everybody else, but they've also killed people within their own communities by sharing the knowledge that they're sharing. But I mean, what do you guys think? I mean, personally, for me, I wish this wasn't part of it, but I think it's people are so tired of what we're going through that it's kind of unsurprising at the same time. What do you guys think?
Samantha?
Yeah, I think that there's an old adage that basically says something to the effect of crisis doesn't build your character, it shows your character. And that has not been the prettiest picture for many, many people over the last 2 years. And I think it's such an absolutely complex question to unpack. I mean, I don't think shame ever belongs anywhere in anyone's discourse or dialogue. I think you can throw the same shame at people who, like I have 2 fathers, one who passed from alcohol and one from smoking. So you could say they knew better and but like there's no place for that, right? They made their choices. Yeah. There were consequences, and that's that. It's the same thing when a drunk driver kills himself and someone else. Like there are a million different versions of how this exact situation plays out. And shaming the person has never made anybody feel better.
Yeah.
It just doesn't. It doesn't work. But I think people are not always capable right now of making great decisions. I think the people are stretched. I think I mentioned last week when you guys were on the show in my hometown in Canada, this tiny little town. And one of the largest investors in this town who's like helping to build the waterfront, and he owns a pub in town, and he's well known and well liked in the community. He supports charities, lost his mind in the grocery store because someone refused to wear a mask, chased them out into the parking lot and bashed in a taillight with a baseball bat and ends up in jail. Like pillar of the community, and just snapped. And I just think, I think that woman's page, some 4,000 comments on it or something. And some of them are just awful. And you don't know how many of those people are just snapping. How many of those people are just piling on? But I mean, none of that is bringing the poor husband's wife back. And she's not getting the message. because she's gone. So who are you making feel better?
Yeah.
Yep.
No one.
It actually takes us back to the beginning of the show, where somebody's getting pushed into where a woman's getting pushed into a train by a man. It feels like we're picking on the one with no voice to either spotlight our voice, to vindicate ourselves, to justify ourselves, to have some sort of personal validation, but an intelligent person would go, isn't that ironic, and move on. They wouldn't take the time to let loose on somebody's sight.
Unless that intelligent person has just lost someone to COVID.
Well, yeah, okay. And so then they
just crazy things to people, right?
Yeah.
The
interesting thing is
right now.
You mentioned shame, and shame has been a cultural tool to normalize what is considered unacceptable behavior for millennia. It's that shame and exclusion, the two. So cancel culture and social media shouting is not surprising at all. It was a tactic used in the Greek and Roman times quite often to exclude, to get people to change their mind and reconform again with the group. And what I think the difference is today is that it may have worked in smaller knit communities where we're all reliant on each other. And if you're the fishmonger who's all of a sudden being an arse to everybody, then we're going to exclude you and not buy, and you're going to suffer until you sort of normalize to group norms, and then we'll start buying from you again to reward that behavior, and then you're back in. Otherwise, you're going to suffer and starve. But these days, we don't have that. We don't have that boundary of smallness, because we've got the globe, and I can abuse somebody in some other country. What people aren't possibly seeing is how that can be very detrimental to their profile in the future.
Yeah.
As people dig up this stuff that we've said, and but it is also showing that shaming in that particular way, especially in an anonymous way. In other words, these people don't know who you are. Not going to work as well as somebody using that strategy to somebody who's very close to them. Not that shaming is ever a great strategy, but I'm just saying that it's a strategy that is a very, very, it's been a strategy that's been around for not thousands of years. And so I think people are using it, but they're using it inappropriately, and they're not thinking. And I agree with you, Samantha. I mean, she's not getting the message. Her family, who are grieving right now, are getting abused, really. Yeah. And it's nothing that they did, really. So,
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of the ugly side of the human spirit in the world, and we've seen it it's always there, but I don't know, in the last few years, I'd say before the pandemic. And it's not a very pretty thing to look at, but it's part of being human. And I think what we've, I was just talking to Steve about it last night. And it's like, when we've put all of our attention on the ugliness, and we put all our energy towards the ugliness, we're also in that energy too. And I think we need to be what we believe is the right way to be in the world, and be an example of the right way to be in the world, and hope that other people will say, oh, I don't have to be like that. I don't have to pay attention to that. I can be part of this, the light that needs to shine in the world. And we do need the light to shine in the world. And it's not easy to sit in that space when the ugliness is going on. But I think if we can recruit people into the light, we can hopefully show a new path forward for humanity. But we can never expect that to go away. We have to accept it. It's the yin and the yang, right? The light and the dark. It's human spirit. It's who we are. We've all got it in us. And I suppose maybe that's the problem, right? Where we see ourselves in the ugliness as much as we see ourselves in the good, right?
Well, and I think, and I mean, Andrea, I know you've talked about this before in terms of why is it so personal?
Yeah.
Like you didn't know this woman. Why are you commenting on her page? And if it incites some ire in you, then have a conversation about the actual issue, which is this woman is a victim of misinformation. Where's the misinformation coming from? Focus your ire and your angst on that and see if you can make headway there. But it's misplaced and far too personal when it's attacking the private page of a woman you don't even know. And I know people argue she was a political figure and so she's fair game. And I have whole issues with all that shit as well. But yeah.
Yeah, but are you going to turn up to her funeral and have a go at her there?
Of course
You're
not. No.
Of course not, but that's what they're doing.
Yeah.
Oh, well,
Well, please don't. Yeah. Anyway,
I mean,
don't do that.
It's an ugly world.
Yeah, people are just raging at everything instead of the right things.
Yeah. Think about that rage. Do you want it to be in you? I mean, that's one of the things I certainly don't want. All right, a final COVID story, which I thought was interesting, and it's linked to Canada, so matches our guest today.
Oh, it's China.
Yeah, apparently there's 158 million online shoppers in China who buy from overseas. And Beijing has reported its first Omicron case that is linked to a letter from Canada, which I found, obviously the licking the envelopes, not that people do that anymore, the stamps, but you don't do that anymore really either. But anyway, they think it actually could potentially impact the online shopping of the Chinese nationals into the future, which of course isn't a bad thing for the environment. Did you ever read of that one, Sam?
Oh, yes. Reminded me of a South Park episode called Blame Canada. I mean, it's hard to imagine based on everything, unless that letter was somehow purulated, temperature controlled, and expedited, and then immediately licked by the person on the other end. It's very difficult to wrap your head around how that could actually have been the source of this person's infection.
That's what I'm thinking.
So we're going to apologize and take one for the team and say sorry and send some maple syrup.
Maybe the Chinese government's basically trying to stop the online shopping addiction to reduce the environment impact, and they're just doing it in a quirky way.
I doubt it for the environmental impact.
Yeah. No, I did see that. It made me roll my eyes.
Yeah. As long as people stop shopping.
I'm going to go with Canada. Did Canada support somebody against China recently?
I mean, maybe the envelope went to the wrong person. I don't know.
No, well, remember they had their two diplomats returned, or the two Canadian citizens returned, and it wasn't supposed to be a diplomatic spat.
That was the whole. I can never say this company name right. Huawei.
Yeah.
What you said. That was there was a whole political fiasco there, but I don't think it went to a relative or anything. So
I don't think you pissed them off as much as the Australian government has. So
yeah.
All right.
We've sent COVID contaminated coal to them now.
Yeah.
All right.
Do you want to move on to the environment? And this is look, there's some stuff coming out. A lot of the aid agencies are releasing. Look, there's so many things coming out at the moment. Edwin's Trust Barometer dropped this week. I haven't had a chance to read it, but I want to talk about trust next week because it's a huge issue. But there's some big things that came out from the environment through the aid agencies. But the first thing is last year's overall climate, so this is Inside Climate News, was shaped by warming-driven heat extremes around the globe. So basically a quarter of the world, so 25% of the world's population experienced a record warm year in 2021. It was also one of the most deadly and destructive years on record, and this is because of the unusually warm atmosphere. So I'm talking to a whole bunch of people in Australia, and apparently there hasn't been that much of a summer this year, which is unusual, but there's huge rains coming through at the moment. But these extreme heat waves were exceptional, and obviously we saw the Pacific Northwest heat wave in the US and Canada that killed hundreds, which then, of course, also opened it up for the fires that followed and the devastation that created. Yeah, I mean, it was crazy. But then when you go across to the Philippines, typhoons are getting more destructive. They get 20 storms a year, but of course the infrastructure in the Philippines isn't exactly fantastic when a big storm like this comes through. But these storms are growing progressively destructive. The Philippines emits 0.4% of global emissions. The northern country, so the northern hemisphere, is responsible for 92%, but countries like the Philippines and many others are paying the price for the climate crisis now. So did you guys have a look at either of those two stories before I move on?
Yeah.
Just move on?
I mean, the asymmetrical impact of climate it's mind-boggling. And I think, I actually was writing about this before we came today for something that I'm doing with UWC about, like, we need global representation, because the table at which these decisions are being made and these deals are being brokered are not including the countries that are bearing the brunt of the impact.
Yep.
And they're ignoring the fact that whatever brilliant solution you might come up with for North America or Europe isn't going to work in Afghanistan. It's not going to work in South Sudan. And it feels like a broken record. But like, leadership has to change. The people around the table have to change, or that is never going to change.
Yeah, totally. But there's this idea, like, someone shared an article with me the other day, and it was still talking about 2100, the biggest impacts. And I'm like, it's already here. It's already happening now. We're going to hit 1.5 degrees this decade. But a couple of other things that have come up, right? So Inga Ashing, I'm presuming I'm saying her name right. She heads up Save the Children Worldwide, and she's done an interview with Al Jazeera. I think her speaking English as a second language, it's important to listen to what she's saying, not how she's saying it. But there's an interview which is, "Are we failing to protect vulnerable children?" And I really want to recommend that everybody watches this interview, because what she's talking about is problems that they've never seen before, issues that they've never seen before in specific countries, and it's linked to the climate crisis. It's already happening. So, and if we don't get our heads around this, I mean, these are the problems: are societal breakdown, more child soldiers, abuse of women and children, escalating child marriages in the last couple of years. It's just off the charts. Lack of education, which means there's no future. Lack of security, especially for the children. 50% of those impacted are children. Food insecurity is on the rise. Poverty is on the rise. I mean, this is all happening, right? And there's another article which is World's Poorest Bear Brunt of Climate Crisis, 10 Underreported Emergencies. And I'd like your patience to tell you about these 10 countries, because this report is from Care International, and it's talking about the 10 countries that have had the least media attention, despite each having at least 1 million people that are impacted and affected by climate disasters. So like I said, this is already happening. So what's happening with the climate crisis in many countries around the world has wiped out decades of progress. I think if I was working in the aid industry right now, I'd be feeling hopeless. And I would be feeling devastated that we've lost so much progress, not just because of the pandemic. From Afghanistan to Ethiopia, there are 235 million people worldwide that needed assistance in 2021. That is going to go up to 274 million people this year. And it's the climate crisis that is driving this predominantly. And obviously the pandemic isn't helping. And the poorest are getting the brunt of it, right? So here's the 10 countries. Zambia has 1.2 million malnourished people. 60% of the 18.4 million population are living below the international poverty line of $1.90 a day. Women are most impacted, and this is due to drought. So it's from the climate crisis, as well as rising corn prices and flooding. In the Ukraine, we're of course seeing what's going on over there with Russia and the US. 3.4 million people were in need of assistance in 2021. These are huge numbers. Malawi is facing a food insecurity crisis with 17% of the population severely malnourished. Droughts, floods, landslides, and they're all being predicted to get worse. Central African Republic, if you don't know where these are, go and get yourself an atlas. Civil war has obviously exacerbated this, but you're going to get civil war when people are so desperate. Half of the population faces food insecurity. There's a ceasefire at the moment with the rebels, but more than 700,000 people have been internally displaced, more than half are children. Guatemala, poverty, violence, and the climate crisis leading to problems. 2/3 of the population live on less than $2 a day. 38% of the population face food insecurity. 3.3 million people rely on humanitarian aid. Colombia, 5 million people live under the control of armed groups. 6.7 million people are dependent on humanitarian aid. Food insecurity has been blamed on an economic recession caused by the pandemic, and it also has 1.8 million Venezuelan refugees. Do you guys mind if I finish this 10? I just think they need the voice, right? Burundi, it is ranked as the country that is gaining the least attention in 2020. 2.3 million people of the 12.6 million population were in need of humanitarian assistance. Extreme weather, hunger, and political unrest are the biggest issues.
What's happening now? We're going to hit 1.
Nigeria, it's deeply vulnerable to climate disasters. It always has been. It's facing persistent droughts and recurring floods, which are having catastrophic consequences. 3 million people rely on humanitarian aid. 1.8 million children need food assistance. Half of all children under 5 are malnourished. A malnourished child can never grow into an adult that can be fully productive. Zimbabwe, acute food insecurity, extreme climate conditions, and economic mismanagement. 6.6 million people need humanitarian aid. More than 1/3 of the population lacks sufficient food. Honduras, this is a crazy country. Poverty and violence have exacerbated the humanitarian situation. And of course, many are leaving to the US. 70% of the population live in poverty. And this is droughts, hurricanes, floods. There's 937,000 displaced people, and this is the highest in Latin America. And this is a classic example of the women often stay behind to take care of the children while the men try to go to the US to work. So once again, the poverty is striking women and children the hardest. I mean, these are huge numbers. And then the next story is the world's billionaires have doubled their wealth during COVID pandemic. And this is not just the top 10 richest people on earth. It's also the top 10 in every country on earth have doubled. 99% of the population of the world have lost financially because of the pandemic. That 1% have doubled their wealth. And I think it's time, we started to say, this isn't right. Because they're doubling their wealth at the expense of the planet by creating products that are creating the emissions, which are creating the problems with all these people who are sitting on the front line facing them. And I think it's time we looked at this with different eyes. Anyway, I will be quiet and let you guys talk.
All right, go ahead, Tim.
I was just having a look at how many billionaires there are in the world, and
Lots.
there's 2,750. But there's 62 million millionaires. But yeah, the over 62.1 million people who are worth $1 million or more have a combined worth of 174 trillion.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess we're getting to the point of what are they going to do about it, shifting to what are we going to do about it?
Yeah, so what are the Australian perspectives, there's 47 billionaires in Australia, and their wealth has increased at a rate of $205 million a day. So all they have to do is give a week's worth of profits, and they help solve a lot of problems. They help feed a lot of people. But it's other things like, the mismanagement that gets quoted a lot, right? We talked about it last week. Water management. These countries that are in drought, not because of the environment, but because they don't know how to manage their water. Let's pay for the experts of the world to go into these countries, because we've got to keep people where they are whenever possible, because we've seen in the last decade, when people start to leave their country to migrate because they're thirsty or hungry, then it's a whole lot worse. So, let's take care of your own country, sure, but you've got to invest in these countries around the world to help those people stay where they are. And it's long overdue. And 50% of the children, of the people suffering are children. 50% of the refugees are children. 50% of the people in these countries are children. Do we really not care? As a global society, do we really not care? A malnourished child, their brain doesn't develop properly, but they don't overcome that. It's permanent damage, Anyway.
I think we're back to what Knath said.
Yes.
And it's, I think there's two things. I think people are checking out for a couple of reasons. This would be my thoughts, and then it'd be nice to hear what Samantha has to say with some actual intelligent sensibility behind it. But my thoughts would be, people are checking out because we're so over inundated. We have no margin or space in our life to think. We're not paying attention to what's going on, and when we do and we give something, we don't feel that it's making a scrap of difference, and at some point we end up checking out, or we end up rationalizing selfish behavior for the purposes of trying to make things better. And then we point the finger at billionaires and say, well, we should tax them better, which we definitely should. But the billionaires have got the ones who can lobby the government and keep the government in or out of power. So there's a big political power play happening with who gets the benefit for what. And then we see some billionaires who go on the billionaire train for a while, and when they finally decide to get out of corporate, they actually do something reasonable with their billions, or at least what sounds reasonable with their billions, like Bill and Melinda Gates, for example. Getting together and trying to solve problems and getting scientists involved and trying to really attack the cause and not just the symptom. And then lobbying other billionaires to give them some of the money to be able to help them do it. But then so I guess there's a feeling of overwhelm, but then we circle back to sort of the starfish story, and we go, well, let's do. If everyone could do a little bit about do what we can rather than checking out, we can make a difference. But if we could see how we could make a difference, and the thing is, climate is then, like you said, those workers that are out there in the field trying to do something are just seeing stuff like climate change, just wipe out everything that they've tried to do, and or just make it so much worse. So the call, my question is, what is the call to action? What's the? It can't be open up your wallet and throw some money at it. It's got to be a little bit more tactile. It's got to be a little bit more personal. It's got to be a little bit more relational in a proper way. I mean, I think some of the charitable organizations have tried to make it that way by trying to build a relationship with a family that you're helping, but it's still very remote, and it's they're trying to do it, but are we trying to get involved, or are we kind of keeping things at arm's length because of our own, first world problems kind of thing.
Oh,
So that's
Sam?
not answering any questions. It's more just reflecting a frustration of how can we make a difference? And then Samantha has some answers.
Oh, I wish I had the answers. I came here with questions for you. Yeah, this is, like Andrea referenced earlier, this is a brutal time to be involved in philanthropy, especially certain kinds of philanthropy. I mean, there are definitely organizations that are seeing a tremendous boom from what is going on. Getting One Phuket off the ground was, I'm not going to use the word easy, but it was possible because there was relevance, immediate relevance to me and my life. When I walked down the street, I saw the people who were impacted by what is going on. And so those organizations that are embedded into local communities and doing work for those local communities stand a greater chance at continuing to be able to service their communities. The larger organizations, it's a struggle for so many reasons. And like and what you talked about with the personal appeal and kind of how things are done. And I'm not in any way, shape, or form a traditional fundraiser. I think the way fundraising is done as an industry, I would do things differently. I don't think that coming into your office and seeing that you have a picture of a boat on your desk means that, this guy's got funny money and I'm going to up my ask 20 grand for him. I think it's about relationships. So that's exactly what you're talking about. And relationships need relevance. And that is very difficult to do when you are talking about a problem that somebody can't picture in a country where they don't even know the location of it. And so how do we make it relevant? And I think that there are instances where that is almost impossible to do. I mean, you can make the analogies about, but what if this was your child and those sorts of things. But I really believe that there are organizations that need institutional funding. They need the billionaires, they need the members of the Giving Pledge to say, this is absolutely imperative work. To get it done, we can't, adopt a family, feed a child for a week enough to get the volume of funding that's required to avoid this humanitarian crisis from getting any worse. And so we're going to take those matters into our own hands, and we're going to make sure those problems get solved. And then leave the smaller community problems to the organizations that are there on the ground, embedded in those communities that have that relevance and can make that impact. And a heartbreaking example that I was involved in was with UWC, which is a global education movement that gives kids scholarships from all over the world to go and study. And we create this global microcosm on campus. And these kids leave with the kinds of skills that we need global leaders to have. They understand diplomacy. They understand differing perspectives. They've worked across languages and cultures and differences to collaborate and create positive impact in the world and the environment. It's an amazing, amazing program. And when Afghanistan fell on August 15th of last year, and the whole world was glued to their television for 2 solid weeks, watching the carnage happen in front of their eyes, when we said we want to raise money for 2020 Afghan students to be able to go safely out of Afghanistan and study in a UWC, to date, they have only raised enough money for 11. How? When a narrative has captured the consciousness of the entire world, do you still not motivate someone enough to put their hand in their pocket? Right? And I think, and this is a supposition, and this is what I wanted to actually ask you guys about, and anyone else is listening, is there's a very different psychology right now for everybody. And I come from very humble beginnings. We have enough, but there's not a trust fund or a big fat chunk of change anywhere for us or our family. We got 2 kids to put through university, and Andrea knows, and if Muchenga's still listening, she'll laugh, but like, I will literally give you the shirt off my back. I have given a teacher who walked into my office the shoes off my feet because hers broke, and I was like, I can walk to the car barefoot. Like, I'm the worst person to work in fundraising because I just give all my money to whatever organization I'm supporting. But even I have had this narrative in the back of my mind lately thinking, like, can we afford this? I don't have regular work. I don't have a constant income. We've moved to a new country. We've had to furnish a whole new house. My husband's job is only 3 months old. Is there stability there? What happens? What happens if we don't have a fallback plan? And all of a sudden, the contributions that I would make without thinking twice about them have stopped. Not entirely. I mean, we had horrendous floods here in Malaysia, but like, not that it was ever like thousands of dollars or anything, but I'm the kind of person who's like, I'm going to buy that guy lunch, or that person or this kid needs something or whatever. And you just kind of do all these little acts of kindness. But now I have to think twice about them. And I wonder how widespread that little voice in the back of your head is when we're all in crisis and we're all facing instability. That
one, I think, is, so the situation you described was a security one. Yours was about certainty and security of ability to be able to give. I think there's another one with the Afghan one, for example, the Afghan example. The one that came to my mind as you said it is, were people distrusting the authenticity of the organization trying to raise the funds for those 20 people? And was it a trust was it a trust element? Because watching it meant I had compassion for what was going on there. I felt a sense of outrage or fear. I felt for the people, and then somebody goes, can you give me money? It's just like, you're using this situation to get my money, and I don't know who you are. So even though they may have a big brand behind them, so I wonder. This is where globally recognized organizations actually have a really powerful position to do a lot of good, because their brand is trusted by when they're saying we're going to step in to help, and everyone then would have a trust sort of thing to go, oh, it's just a PR thing or whatever, but or save on their tax or something. So it's almost like, but then I would say, what's the next level down on that? And am I distrusting them because I don't want to pay? Or am I distrusting them because there is so much scamming, and it's like I become very, very sensitive to being scammed. I don't want to be scammed.
Can I just offer another point of view? Because I know, Sam, you would be, that would be through the UWC alumni, so the group of people that traditionally fund the scholarships, right? Yeah. So it's not a trust issue. I feel that the world has basically, once all that, because we started the no-show because of Afghanistan. Like I reached out to Tim and said, we got to start like now. We've got to talk about this. But I since watching what's been going on, the number of people, I mean, Afghanistan isn't in that top 10 list because obviously it gets a lot of media coverage. But since then, we aren't seeing a lot of media coverage around what's actually going on in Afghanistan. Just this week, they're talking about releasing some of the funds that have been locked up. The millions and millions are at risk of, the food. There's no food, famine. It's not a good situation. I actually think the world has basically switched. This is just my impression of what I'm reading. I think the world has switched off from Afghanistan and said, we're going to give up on that country because nobody can fix that country. I think that's the mindset that I'm seeing around the world. And I actually think it's overlapped into raising funds for those kids. People have given up on the country. especially while the Taliban's in power.
Yeah. Doesn't bode well for all the organizations trying to help Afghanistan, does it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I still, okay, so maybe the example of the UWC alumni one trust wasn't an issue there, but even when you were talking about the funds being locked up just now, so maybe this is just me, but even when you were talking about the funds being locked up and finally being released, what went through my head was, who profited from all those funds being under their control while it wasn't in Afghan control? And will some auditor go and make sure that the funds that were invested somewhere was the dividends and everything else accumulating during this time that it was being locked up? And if not, who did that go to? Because in my mind, that's the way this corporate machine is working. It's the way the global financial banking system is working. There is more and more compassionless people running these places, and things about, you know, we're doing good and all of that sort of stuff are just posters on walls, but they're not really corporate values, and we are beholden to shareholder interests and lobbyists. And look, one of the questions from Muriel was, why aren't governments mandating the richest to solve the problems? Is this that complicated? Well, yeah, if they did, they'd be out of power immediately. You know.
Well, I mean, but then, you know, a lot of the richest people in the world are trying to solve the problem. So we talked about Bill Gates and Warren Buffett, and you know, I see a lot of the billionaires and trillionaires getting a lot of criticism, but I think there's a group of them that are doing incredible work, and I don't think doing it in alignment with politicians is necessarily in their interest anyway, which is probably another reason why they don't want to pay tax, because then they have no control over what gets addressed. I'd rather Bill Gates, who does his deep research and goes into all of the issues that he decides to tackle, because I trust his brain and his intellect to work out what the big problems are. And I know just saying his name will attract people going, you know, all sorts of conspiracy theories about Bill Gates. In fact, just go if you just go onto Twitter and just do hashtag Bill Gates, just have a look at all the stuff down there and next to his name. It's really quite remarkable. When I was looking for the #1 hashtag of the year, that came up. But
the stats that just came out of the US is super fresh. The 25 largest donors in the US have given a total of $169 billion during their lifetimes. Buffett's annual gift to the Gates Foundation, and the foundation set up by his late wife and 3 children, gave $4.1 billion last year. So, I mean, we can't wipe every rich person, paint every rich person with the same brush. You know, no. There are absolutely people out there who are trying, you know, and I love the fact that Jeff Bezos' wife is now on the Giving Pledge. And
she's great.
All of his money.
Yeah. But is it the owners of Canva, Australian couple, who have basically made 30% of the business goes towards charity, 30%. So it's not, that sort of stuff, right? Mm-hmm. But I mean, we do need. I mean, you know, like I said, the wealth has been accumulated on the back of environmental destruction, regardless of the industry anyone's in. The wealth has been accumulated. In the last 2 years in the pandemic, their wealth has doubled, whereas 99% of people have suffered. Their wealth has doubled. A percentage of that could be, you know, to go out there and address them. You know, 40 countries are on the verge of famine, 2 officially. 40 countries. We've got some huge issues, and if we only look in our own backyard, we are missing the fact that it's nothing that's happening in the world is national. It's global. The environment crisis is global. The waste crisis is global. We need a global perspective, and we need groups of people out there tackling the biggest issues. And there are solutions, but we just we keep looking to politicians to solve this, and I honestly do not think politicians are capable of solving it. One, because they're national, but two, because they're just they're going to do what they're voting.
Their agenda is, one of their agendas is staying in power,
Exactly.
and the other agenda is looking after their own people.
Yeah.
So that cultivates I'm not going to take care of that list of 10.
Yeah. So Sam, we didn't officially go into the theme section where we're talking about philanthropy in time of crisis, but is that what you wanted to cover?
Yeah, I mean, really, I was thinking, here's a little chance to do some unofficial anecdotal research on, what organizations. There are so many philanthropic organizations with great reputations doing amazing work who are fighting all of the things that ail us. How do you decide which to give to? Nobody can give to them all. I mean, unless maybe if you're on the giving list, you can give to them all. The average person can't give to them all. So in a crisis, what we've seen, and this bears out in the research that's coming out in philanthropy, the organizations right now that are seeing an uptick in donations, healthcare. Makes sense, right? Hospitals need ventilators. People want to fund vaccines. The pandemic has directly impacted in some way, shape, or form just about every human being on the planet. But the hunger in Africa hasn't. The unrest in the Middle East hasn't. The Muslim hunger in China hasn't. So how do these organizations who are fighting for the same dollars compete against the organizations that have a crisis fueling their dominance in your mind, in your consciousness, in your wallet? Because I'm afraid that we will see some of these if the pandemic continues much, much, much longer, and we continue to see job losses, and we continue, quite honestly, women are the philanthropists most of the time. The reason people give, it tends to be the woman in the household. The impact on women and the workplace has been massive as a result of COVID. So if these little organizations that do the kind of work that allows the government systems to keep working and people to continue being taken care of, if they fall to the wayside, we have a different crisis to handle at the end of the crisis.
Right.
And Andrea, I think for me, I look at it, when I say crisis, to me, it's also short-term, long-term, right? And we saw this with one Phuket. The immediacy of making sure people don't starve versus the long-term benefit of job creation and sustainability and all those things we need.
Yeah.
And how do you decide to say, I'm not going to give that money to this point, right, to this family right now that's going to feed them, because I know that in the long term, job creation and sustainability is actually going to have a greater impact. Like, those are impossible. It's Sophie's choice.
Yeah.
So how do we make those choices in this time?
Yeah.
And I was wondering how you make those choices. What do you support and what do you not support?
Well, the one Phuket example was just a time issue. It wasn't even a financial issue. It was just we could do one, but everyone that's involved in it, typically, anything to do with a group of volunteers, every single person that we wanted to help already had a full-time job. So they were doing it on top of their work. So everyone was stretched for time, and it was done. Everyone gave their hearts and souls to this, right? But the priority had to be taking care of people who couldn't afford to eat. Just had to be, Right. But the longer term goal. But even now, we're back in we need to make sure that people are donating so that we can buy food, because Omicron hit, and it's just keeping going back to it and back to it. So yeah, it is. It's a really challenging thing. But even in that example, a group that got behind it, what we need is help. What we need is a bigger group, more people. Like Tim was saying, what do you do? You know, people feel hopeless. Just if everyone did what they need. You know, I shared a video the other day of this lady. I think she was a maid somewhere in India, and she found a dog that was struggling, and she fed it, and now she's feeding 800 dogs on her wage. Right? Beautiful story. If everyone did what they could, whether it's an action like she took, or sharing your voice, which is obviously what I do, or, you know, there's so many, or donating your money, but we need global communities that come together to solve the biggest problems, and we need local communities who can be solving the biggest problems and creating the opportunities. But we're not seeing that yet. That's not everywhere yet. We're not, you know, that mindset isn't here yet. You know, Tim, last week you talked about sort of like a global sort of group, like, you know, United Nations. And, you know, that's not the obvious choice, but the power is so crippled within the United Nations because of politics. It's, you know, people always talk badly about it, but the reality is we need to let a group like that free. Let them free to achieve what we need to achieve. The World Health Organization, you know, they're just being slammed constantly, and they're a bunch of people that's underfunded. You know, the donations from the international countries, they're not coming in. They're doing their best in a pandemic, but they're not getting the support that they need, you know. But we need to, we need to just turn it all around. But if you're feeling hopeless, start at home. Start with you. You know, there's 17% of the global population is middle class. If every middle class person donated $1 a week or $1 a month to the World Food Program, that's a lot of people. That's a lot of money. You know, start small, do what you can, but do something.
There is the other, and yes, I agree with you. Samantha, did I hear you right when you were also saying, do you deal with the needs of feeding people now, or do you deal with the longer term problem of solving what the issue was, and then how do you make the decision? And I guess my answer to that was, where Andrea is I can see the person in need. I feel a human obligation to help them if I can. And your example of giving your shoes off your feet is the same sort of thing. Knowing that your ability to get those shoes back in another way is not far away, whereas for them it is, you know. So there is an immediate need, and I've told the story before, I think, Andrea, when I was in India, and we had this sort of, we're in the middle of this little village. We were there for a women's leadership conference with the Hunger Project. And the reason why it was a women's leadership conference is the Hunger Project had worked out that if we train the women to be effective leaders in the village councils, because they were there under mandate of the government that they had to have at least a third represented by women, but they were basically put in a corner until the next election, and then they would be rotated while the men did whatever they were doing. But if they could train the women to be effective leaders within that council, then their voice would be heard for how the funds of that village would be invested or spent. And what they found was, while the men were struggling with the enormity of the problem that their village faced and would either end up spending some of the funds on bribery, booze, or gambling, the women would be spending it on education, infrastructure, and future-centered things. Not that bribery, gambling, and alcohol is even short-term centered, but possibly the bribery is. It's like, you know, I give because we need this. But so what the Hunger Project was doing is they were really seeing it in a long-term perspective to go, if we can impact that's what's going to really make the biggest tidal wave of change in this. But then we had a problem. The village we were in had a dry well, and they were in the middle of a drought, and they were running out of food. Women had to walk, 10 kilometers for water or whatever it was, 5 there and 5 back. And so one guy could pick up his phone and say, I know a guy who has a backhoe that can drill the well down lower to get the water. And then the Hunger Project guys were like, no, don't do that, because that's basically charity. And so then we had this whole thing about what charity is and the problems it can actually cause. Charity from the perspective of, oh, these people don't have toothpaste, let's give them 3 crates of toothpaste, and that's great until the toothpaste runs out. And then now you've created a lack of toothpaste, which they didn't have before, and then everything's worse. But if you actually help people, it's the teach a man to fish rather than just give him a fish sort of idea. But while he's starving, holding the fishing rod, you kind of need to feed him. So you need to give him a fish while you teach him to fish, I think is the solution. It's not the either or, it's a bit of the both. But then at the same time, you need to also put some money aside in longer term investments. And this is where the bankers of the world and the fund managers and everybody else that I sort of pointed the finger at being evil actually use your skill for the solution. And this is what Buffett does so well. He understands that if I just put this, if $100 comes in and a chunk of it goes into a fund that in 20 years will have an extra 0 at the end of it. And then 20 years after that, it goes nuts based on the fund being managed reasonably well, which is what the Templeton Foundation tried to do. John Templeton's foundations tried to do that sort of stuff. So long as it isn't getting sort of misappropriated along the way, that can actually go a long way to solving a lot of the future problems, long-term future problems, 20 years I'm talking about. Then a chunk of that money needs to go into projects that are going to take a while. And if we look at it in terms of governments, in 2-party system governments, if we just invested everything in that long-term project, you would be voted out of power if it was a two thing. So you need to solve the immediate problems of your constituents right now, feed them, but you also need to put something in place that's going to solve the actual problem later on. Set up the farms, get the irrigation systems, get them to be self-sufficient, which was the idea in India as well, and help that. I can't control the weather, but I can dig a well. I can dig it lower. But then the other challenge was if they dug the well, it was going to then change the balance of power with all the surrounding villages. So one act of charity of digging a well then changed the balance of power, even though it helped the people. If the leadership in that community wasn't right, they could abuse that power, and the corruption and everything else, the bribery and everything else goes the other way. All of a sudden, I can get it back. So there's a lot. It's like, it seems to me like there's 10 things hanging on one set of scales, 10 different, not just 2 things, but there's 10 of them, and we've got to balance all of them in a way, and the weightings are different. We just need to work that out.
So my question is, how do you personally work that out? When you have money that you have committed to philanthropy, and you've been a long-time supporter of something that is long-term, okay? And I'll use UWC as an example just because it's top of mind. So scholarship for 2 kids to come from an underprivileged background to go to an independent school for 2 years. Then they will go on to university, likely with scholarship based on that. Then they will go out and they will hopefully make a difference in the world. Ideally, they go back to their community and they make a difference. COVID hits, and there are people in my community starving. Are you still going to support the long-term, these kids will eventually go out and make an impact and change the world and alleviate the problems that have put us in this situation? Or is the feeding the people in front of you so compelling that then eats away at what you would otherwise invest in those longer term solutions? Because I totally understand what you're saying, but there are very few organizations that actually that have a short and a long-term play, right? Like either you're kind of immediate relief on the ground in a crisis zone, or you're scholarship based and you're talking about training the future. There aren't too many that get to say, like, you can put it in this bucket that'll work right now, or this bucket that'll work later. Definitely organizations, but not many that have both of those.
Yeah.
So when you have to choose.
Yeah, it's really, I find that really interesting. My whole attitude to this from the beginning has been, we need to suffer more. Our family, right? So whatever we have contributed, we continue, plus we do more. So we suffer more because people are suffering so much more. And, you know, we're just like everybody else, we've been impacted financially by the crisis, right? But to me, not contributing wasn't even an option because there's an enormous amount of cost that's gone out of our life. Every other week we were traveling, we were doing lots and lots of different things, right? So there's an enormous amount of cost. But I always said to Steve, if we come out of this time richer, we're assholes. That was my attitude towards it. So keep giving. So that's kind of what, you know, and it's been an interesting process, you know, and One Phuket's a great example of it, you know, we worked on it, but, you know, I've had to talk to lots and lots of different people through this time. And the whole message was, you know, we're not just taking care of our neighbours, we're also taking care of ourselves. Because I was reading all these stories about violence on the increase around the world because people are desperate, people are breaking into houses, but they're just stealing food. People are hungry. So when we take care of our neighbours, we're also taking care of ourselves.
Yep.
You know, so and that was another message that we were sort of putting out there, and it's still the message today. It's like, come on, we can all get through this together, but you can't get through together if people are literally dying on your doorstep. And I feel privileged and humbled to be able to see that versus a lot of people are living in countries who never see it. They never get exposed to that sort of level of poverty. But Tim, two things that you said. One was first, equality is one of the biggest issues that we must overcome if we have any chance of getting ready for the future. And equality has slipped back by a generation since the pandemic began. Women are the answer, not just to getting through the crisis now, but the long-term answer, just for all the reasons that you said. And we need to take this message on board that giving women the ability to control their destiny and their community's destiny will make more of a difference than anything else that we can do, including educating girls. But the other thing that you were talking about was the teach a man to fish thing. So this sort of idea, and I think so to me this is an old idea now. You can't teach a man to fish in an environment that's sort of degrading before their very eyes and they can't even do the basic things very well. Because of things that are happening in other parts of the world are creating problems in their environment so that they can't farm, they can't fish because these big trawlers are coming through and taking all the fish, right? So I actually think that teaching a man to fish is an old idea, and I think we need to start going, how do we help these people stay where they are? And if they can't stay where they are, what do we need to build and where to give them a life of dignity rather than a life of desperation? So I actually think we're at that point where we need to be thinking about that. 40 countries facing famine, we're definitely at that point. What do you think of that?
Yeah. So how do we shift investment from immediate crisis to forward-thinking projects like that?
Yeah.
When all we see is immediate crisis.
Yeah.
I have a thought, and it's a thought that formed during this conversation. So it's not a very well thought out thought, and it could be a disaster. But what I've heard about One Phuket and the work that you've done, setting this thing up to solve an immediate problem and everything else. Now, if somebody listening wants to start their own version of a solution to an immediate problem, is there something that they can read, share, or learn from your setup experience of how to do it? And it might sound like you might go, oh, it's straightforward. You just need to do this, 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 and this. There's lots of hurdles along the way, and there's lots of walls you're going to run into and doors being slammed and everything else. But you need this group of people to do these sorts of things. But that document of here's your blueprint to get something off the ground, to start making an immediate impact in your local community could be interesting. And the reason why I thought about that was if Phuket was bigger. Now, One Phuket, presumably you started with a few communities that you were trying to feed.
All of it.
The whole of
The whole
Phuket.
island. The whole island,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, let's pretend Phuket was further out in the ocean, a little bit more isolated, and there were 3 islands, 3 Phukets next to each other, but they were geographically separated by a bit of water. So there's Phuket 1, 2, and 3 for arguments. This is what I was thinking. And you guys are all on Phuket 1, and you set up one Phuket 1. And you set it up and you started solving the problem for Phuket 1, and then you got donors and because of your ability in social media and your communication and duck feet and everything else, that money was coming in for Phuket 1. Now you had more than enough to feed Phuket 1. Would you then have taken the surplus to start feeding Phuket 2?
Well, the interesting thing about this example is that we started with the idea. So there's about 500,000 people in Phuket on the main islands, right? So we started it with the idea of all of Phuket, the surrounding islands, and Phang Nga, which is just over the border. And basically, so there's a group of people that were 5 Star Marine, one of the boating companies, have recently set up this charity foundation called Living Waters Phuket. They're continuing the life bag program. And we're bringing the Hotels Association in, doing more with them because there's more customers now. So there's, a little bit more opportunity for employment as well as hopefully more charity. But the idea has always been to help everyone in need. But there's never enough of us. The 5 Star Marine team, there was never enough of them, not just to pack the bags, to actually pack the bags. We've had the army in at some points to pack 5,000 life bags to go out.
Schools,
we've got
boarding houses.
the schools. UWC's been awesome. All of the international schools. But so one of the issues we're facing at the moment, 19,000 people are in quarantine, and when you're in quarantine, you can't go out and earn. And so it's you day by day. People live by what they earn every day, right? So 19,000 people can't get out and work, and they could be locked up for 2 weeks, maybe a bit longer. So making sure they get enough food to be able to sustain themselves through that period, so that they can be comfortable in that isolation period, so that they're not spreading COVID without feeling desperate because they're going to starve, right? But the perspective has always been that, and so now we've got lots of content around that. We've talked to lots of people. Sean's standing at 5 Star. He's done lots of conversations. He's had lots of conversations with some of the other tourist areas around Thailand. But with the sustainability thing, what I'm doing is I'm documenting everything that we're talking about, so that when the time comes, we can say, here's what we did, here's what we learned. Here you go. Take what you want from it. So the idea is that we're always documenting what we do, so we can pass it on to anybody else who wants it.
I think the time has come, but I okay. So the documentation is happening. So because that for me was the way that One Phuket or some similar organization, the One Phuket 1, for example, could scale while also ring fencing where they are capable of helping. Because if you guys, for example, spread yourselves too thin, at some point it's not going to be, if you go, we'll take on the whole of Thailand, then you're done for, unless everything scales elsewhere. So it's kind of like, how do we help other people replicate what works, so that they don't have to start from ground zero?
Exactly, but there's other aspects within the mix, right? So the whole idea of One Phuket is not to do the work, but it's to find the people doing the work, making sure they've got what they need to be successful, and shining a light on their results. So there's another group called Scholars of Sustenance Thailand, SOS. And so they rescue food from the hotels, and then they serve it to people. Obviously, with all the hotels being closed during the pandemic, they weren't able to rescue food, but then they've signed partnerships with 7-Eleven, so they take any leftover food that's going to hit their expiry date. Yep. And they're, just in Phuket, they've delivered 3 million meals last year out into the community. So it's the farmers.
And that's one guy and his truck.
Yeah. No, he's got 3 trucks now.
Ah, okay.
Yep.
He's expanded.
So it's also about finding the people who are actually doing the work and helping them be successful. Because every time, the reason One Phuket started is because I kept seeing anxiety in eyes of people who were trying to do good. And I wanted to take the anxiety away, because every single day they worry about money. They worry about the future. And I just wanted to take that away from them. Yeah.
My question, I feel like my question has gone into the need part again. So if we're talking about that multi-balance thing, the scales of multiple balance, where we need to balance significantly long-term with immediate need, what we get caught into is what the conversation got caught into, which is the immediate need. And we always get drawn back into the immediate need, which is what just happened. But you are documenting. So my thought was, how do you scale? The documentation was the way to scale. Why would you document it and not just scale yourself? Because you've only got a sphere of control. At some point, there is a boundary. Not really, but let's just say there is. And let's say it's what you said. It was Phuket, the surrounding islands, and a couple of other places. And that was where you were going to focus your impact. If you got so much resources beyond what was needed and you were sustaining people, my question kind of came to, well, my thinking came to, would you then expand to more places nearby, or would you start planning the balance to make sure that this community never has this happen to them again?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's more the focus, like it's getting people through and getting people back on their feet, creating businesses and, funding, tie people into these businesses that don't rely on tourism, so that if another crash happens, they're not going to be out in their ass again. So it's all of those things. So, and it's not, you have to respond to the immediate crisis, but it's not a case of what we're doing is going to make sense for the rest of Thailand. 90% of the economy in Phuket is tourism. It's not the same in Bangkok or Chiang Mai. It's a big agricultural area right there. So everywhere's got to be, they've got to do their own thing that makes sense. And also, we've got a unique community. There's millionaires, billionaires living here in the cliffs, right? Bringing them into it, giving them an opportunity to fund things that make sense to them. So I think it has to, and that's why we've wanted to document it, so that anyone who wants to sort of take what we've done can take it, but they've got to localize it based on wherever they are.
100% agree.
So this is an interesting kind of lens to look through it in. And part of a couple of conversations that I've been having with the other work that I do in consulting with schools about how to respond when the crisis is chronic. Because we are now well and truly into the chronic crisis phase of COVID. If we thought that we were going to get out of it with Delta, and then Omicron came walking around and the WHO is saying there's no end in sight right now, is how do we stop those long-term projects from falling to the wayside when the crisis is chronic? It's not, this is 6 months we need to feed people and then everybody's back on their feet. This is 2 years.
Yeah.
And so that money that's being siphoned off for these chronic crisis phases is really going to ultimately be detrimental to those long-term projects.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it's not easy, but listen, I was thinking we're 2 hours in. We probably should wrap up, right? We could talk about this forever. But just before we do, what is taking your attention at the moment? Distraction, non-news.
Cheer.
Cheer?
Cheer.
Just cheer in general? Or?
No, it's a Netflix series.
Okay.
How do you spell it? J-E-E-R?
No, like cheerleaders. Cheer. It's literally, I know, I can see both of your faces right now, but I promise you, if you watch one episode, you'll be hooked. It's a docu-series about a small U.S. college called Navajo that has like the top cheerleading team in the U.S. But it's about this. I know it sounds ridiculous.
I'm so not hooked right now.
Yeah.
Wait until you watch 5 minutes of how insanely powerfully athletic these people are. And you're watching, like, anybody who thinks cheerleading is like rah-rah, sis boom bah with some pom-poms has a very, very different perspective after watching the show. And it talks about the kids who, like, this is their chance. This is their way out of a bad neighborhood. It's their key to a scholarship. It's all of those things. And on the end of it, these kids are practicing like 5-6 hours a day. They are stronger than any basketball player, soccer player, volleyball player you're going to find at a collegiate level. They're stronger than gymnasts. Like, it's absolutely insane.
Okay.
And it is like a beautifully interesting, but, you know, absolutely not mentally taxing hour of the day. And sometimes you just need a glass of wine and an episode of Cheer, and you admire their skill and strength.
I love it. I love it.
They had a break. There was the original season, and now they've just come back sort of 2 years later. And the woman who's the head coach has taken an absolute thrashing. Like, she wasn't prepared. Oprah Winfrey had them on. Ellen had them on. Like, it became a thing in North America. And she wasn't prepared for the exposure. She wasn't prepared for the hate that comes with the love. And she said, the only reason I agreed to do it was so that people would understand the actual athleticism and skill involved in what we do.
Yeah.
And it absolutely does that.
It's like the equivalent of a documentary on synchronized swimming, right? Another female-led sort of sport that it just isn't given any credibility. And you're right. And I love watching shows like that because, you know, we didn't grow up in North America, so that's not part of the culture. I mean, I remember I wanted to be part of the Bluebells, which was Carlton's female cheerleading squad, but which really was, I think, I don't know, because I never really looked in that kind of probably went when I was about 8. It wasn't really my kind of thing, but I'm always happy to have my mind opened. I've
never dreamed of being a cheerleader, but I'd like to be as strong as one of them.
Yeah, no, definitely. I've been watching Afterlife. Ricky Gervais, have you seen it? The new season?
Mm-hmm.
The third season's. Oh yeah. It's a small town, and it's like I recognize the people in my life, you know, and also his sadness, the cynicism.
Like shit, though, Ricky.
Yeah, he does in a lot of other ways, but not in this. I know what you mean.
Did you ever watch Schitt's Creek?
Yeah, no, I'm still.
Yeah, Andrew was talking about that last week.
Still watching it.
So good.
Very good. All right, Tim.
I don't know if I've been doing any downtime.
Oh.
Did I talk about going to see The Matrix? I went and saw The Matrix. Maybe that was 2 weeks ago. I went and saw The Matrix part 4.
Yeah.
Which I enjoyed, but you know, it was quite a cool sort of idea. I thought it was a bit drawn out in some areas, but I quite enjoyed that. But that was just movie. So yeah, I'm just trying to think. I haven't really been able to sit in front of the television. One of the things I do, so I'm doing this course, and one of the things I found while doing the course is whenever I sat down to read the textbook, I'd fall asleep immediately. And I think that's less about the quality of the textbook and more about the fact that I'm just so tired. Yeah. And so the only way that I could stay awake is to record myself reading the textbook and then make it available to all the other students. I probably shouldn't say that out loud. For those who come from English as a second language place,
yeah, right, nice.
That would benefit for somebody reading it while they read along with me.
Yeah, that's a good thing to do.
So I've been doing that, and that's been exhausting. I mean, I don't know how anyone got through the last episode where I'm like, blah, 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 blah. blah, 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 blah. And it's not on video, it's on audio. So they might be thinking I'm taking a sort of intelligent thinking pause, but really I'm just falling asleep while reading it.
Yeah. You'll have to start up a podcast with you reading the text.
There is a podcast, but it's private and locked so that I'm not breaching copyright globally.
Nice. Oh, good for you.
Have you
That's
seen?
great.
Have you seen Don't Look Up?
Oh yeah, we talked about it
Andrea,
last week.
Yeah, they talked about it last week, and I said I was going to watch it, and I still haven't. I was going to
Yeah.
secretly watch it last night, and then I fell asleep.
Yeah, you've got to watch
So-
it. You've got to watch
Yeah.
it.
I'll tell you what
Yeah.
you don't have to watch: Nightmare Alley. Don't
Well,
watch
it's
it.
got.
Don't
I'm
do
not going
it.
to watch anything with the word nightmare in it. Really, I'm a bit of a wuss when it comes to scary films.
Is
It's
it a
not
scary film?
No, it's like it's noir. It's not scary. It's just dark.
Okay.
I am.
It's
I have no interest in watching anything to do with the ugliness of the human spirit because I feel that I'm confronted with it every single day on social media and in the news that I watch. So when I'm
Skyhooks.
when I'm looking
you
for
need fear.
yeah, right. Yeah, oh, that's all I want to see. I just want to see goodness, especially if I'm watching TV. The boys are into horror. Mum, watch this with us. I don't want to watch it. Are you scared? No, I just don't want to watch it. I don't want to watch it. I don't want that in my body. Like the world's ugly enough.
I
Right?
don't want to watch it for two reasons, but I'm with you. I don't need to feel more fear.
Yeah.
And the other thing is I'm extraordinarily visual, so I will replay all of those terrifying scenes over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And I don't want to do that to myself. So that's why I'd like to watch another Asterix movie.
Oh, oh no, Asterix should not be movies. They should be read. They're books.
Yeah, but there is the French ones, the live action French ones. Asterix and Cleopatra. If you can find Asterix and Cleopatra, it's hysterical.
I don't want that voice in my head. I've already got my voice in. I've got a voice for them in my head already.
Yeah, so Asterix won't quite fit the voice. He looks sort of Asterix-y, but Obelix will fit the voice, and it's Gerard Depardieu playing Obelix.
Yeah, okay, that would work.
I mean, it totally makes sense, right? But it's beautifully. It's very funny. It's that one is quite cool. But yeah, I totally get what you're saying. It's going to take away. It's somebody else's version of the characters.
It's my imagination that they're going up against, right? I could do it with Game of Thrones, but Asterix. I've seen a couple.
You know what it'll do is you'll watch it and you go, oh, that was good. I'm going to go back and read the Asterix again and have some fun with them. And so that's a nice little thing. Asterix and Tintin were the two. Yeah.
My French and Dutch friends call me
Tintin.
Andrix. Now, one of my names is Andrix. I'm a big passionate Asterix fan. Yeah, I've been to Asterixville in just outside of Paris, the big theme park. Yeah, no, I do like Asterix. There you go, something you didn't know about me.
Well, I didn't know you were a Carlton supporter either, so
not anymore. But
that sucks. Because I've always been a Magpie supporter.
Carlton used to be a champion league when I was a child, and ever since I left Australia, they've been crap. So
it's your fault.
Yeah, it's obviously my fault.
Stay away then, because
yeah. Wherever you go, you take the weather with you, right? I took Carlton's winning streak. Sam, thank you so much for joining us. I hope you enjoyed it.
Yeah, it was great.
Yeah. Will you come and join us again? I hope you got to say everything you wanted to say as well, because we can ramble on a bit.
Yeah.
But I don't know. There's a lot to talk about and big issues, big complex issues, right? And but we will. We've got to believe in our ability to solve them. We really do. And don't give up hope. A lot of people are giving up hope. Don't give up hope. Get involved. Do something. Believe.
I want to challenge you, Andrea and Samantha, but to publish the blueprint, even if it's incomplete, and then maybe just blog the next bits so that people can follow along. I think that's a good way of sharing the message. But the more people that can pick up something like that and go, well, if they did it, how did they do it? And maybe I can do something in my own context and whatever. I think that would be cool. And basically, when you asked Samantha, did she say everything that she wanted to say? It was very clear from looking at her when she said yes that she didn't get to say everything she wanted to say.
She'll have to come back.
Yeah, absolutely didn't. And she even looked at a list of things and she only got to one on her list. So I would suggest we definitely have her back, because that conversation had a long way to go.
Yeah, definitely. It's a big part of the overall story that we talk about every week.
Yep.
So my sister, Philippa Edwards, will be on next week. And as you might not be surprised, she's fairly feisty like me and pays attention to lots of stuff. So that should be a good one. But I think we should focus on the trust barometer. So Edelman's Trust Barometer. I don't know, Sam, I'll send you a link if you haven't got it yet, but that was released, I think, just yesterday. It's just this week. And it's looking like media and governments are both the two big targets for lack of trust. And not surprising, right? Yeah. So
What
thanks,
about
Sam.
Rocket Billionaires? Are they on the list?
I know. Like I said, I haven't had time. I was getting ready for this. Right.
I'm so sorry I won't be there next week, because this would have been a wonderful one to be on. But Edwards, I don't know if I can handle it.
Yeah, you could.
Yeah.
You all right, guys?
Handle the truth.
I'm gonna end broadcast now. So we'll see you next week. And thanks so much, Sam. Really appreciate you being here.
Pleasure.